The recent United States presidential election was a prime example of the way the media not only portrays people in a certain light and purposely subverts the context of things they have said to transmit a different message or paint them in a specific character, not purely, as a lot of people will say, cynically just for ratings and attention and controversy sells and to have something to put on the 24-hour news cycle. But this election was an example of how it is done as a set agenda to push a narrative, which often leads to political aims that the person setting the agenda and pushing that certain bias and narrative forwards wishes to come to pass. And for that to happen, they think that they need, or that it will foment the correct situation if this person is painted a certain way. And so this is a general topic which affects our lives on a daily basis in terms of how society and politics, etc., are thought of and run, and the decisions made, not just on the top level by the thinkers and the people putting in place big things, but then in terms of legislature, and then in terms of our day-to-day life as smaller policies come in line with those broader strokes of society and how culture itself is affecting how we think and how we behave. But this example of the recent presidential election was a really good one in terms of being able to dig down into some of the specifics to show you, for people who maybe don't have a background in journalism or don't know how to research these things, just how skewed the narrative was compared to what a reasonable interpretation of the facts would actually be. And so I don't want to make it like this video is only about Donald Trump and the way he was portrayed, because it's actually making a grander point. But I want to use an example because examples are very good in terms of illustrating and highlighting these specific problems that were encountered here. So, this election saw Donald Trump, the Republican candidate, built into this terrible figure, a figure who ostensibly, by the way he was painted and the way his comments were taken and the context was changed and then they were repeated endlessly, was actually portrayed as not just a bad politician or a bad potential president, but as a bad human being, as a terrible person who, by the societal norms that are agreed upon in society as this is what like a person should be, who's a normal person and a good person, that he was a terrible person. He was a really horrible person. I mean, to the most extreme example, he was literally compared as a Hitler-esque figure, a neo-Hitler as if it were, like a modern day Hitler who, as a result, the implication was if he got into power, would then do things that Hitler did when Hitler had power over Nazi Germany, and also was labeled with practically every kind of political mud, so any kind of social slur that you can put upon someone. He was called a racist and a homophobe and a transphobe and a sexist, and he was cast as a homophobe, despite the fact, if you go out there, as I did to make this video, and you search for things he has said or actions he has done that would make it reasonable to say he is a homophobe. He hates gay people. To some degree, he is afraid of gay people. He doesn't want gay people around. He wants to stop gay people existing and their way of life continuing. If you go out there and you search for this is one of the things I do as a journalist. This is something I do as someone who thinks of himself as an intellectual thinker who has integrity and actually wants to know what is going on before drawing my conclusions, not the other way around. What I do in these scenarios every time is I don't go and read things by people I agree with. I don't go and read opinions that I also subscribe to. I go out there and I try and find the exact case that the people against this individual are making. And I try and find their best evidence, and I try and find the order of it and the chronology and the context, and I try and see how close it is to what they're presenting. So I went out there and I searched for Donald Trump, anti-gay things, homophobic things he'd said which people said were some of the worst things he'd said. I went out there and I found them, and here's what we're going to find out. You're going to be shocked probably by the gap between what was said and the way it was interpreted later by different people. So he was cast as this homophobe who's anti-gay marriage, who dislikes gay people, similarly with transgender issues. That's nice. So on the topic of same-sex marriage, so this is a really big issue, right? This is one that gay people particularly care about because obviously it affects their ability to get married and have civil unions, whatever they're called. So at all times, as a presidential candidate, Donald Trump made it clear that his position on same-sex marriage was never, I don't want same-sex marriage to exist. I hate gay people being married. It disgusts me that they're married. It was never any of these things. What he continuously and consistently stated as his perspective was that he wanted it to be an issue for the states to decide, not the federal government to tell all the states of the United States of America, you must all obey this rule, a federal rule. But he wanted each state to be able to determine for itself its laws. Now, by the way, in many areas, states in America determine their own laws. So there are states in America that determined that legalized cannabis now is acceptable. Medical cannabis is acceptable. Even though on a federal level, actually for a long time, it has been absolutely illegal. And in fact, there were times in California where they had medical marijuana, medical cannabis, where they would have dispensaries and it was legal on a statewide level, but the federal government would come in and raid places and take their money and take the drugs, and then they would leave them fucked as businesses. And that's the contrast that's going on there. So people can understand, a lot of people, this premise that states decide things separately from other states. Because, by the way, think about why this is logical for the formation of the United States of America. Because it means that if you are a state that is primarily a farming state, you don't have to enforce the exact same rules and the same policies and the same day-to-day minor legislature that a state that isn't all about farming is about. A state that's about mining or something like that, or sea imports. Because if you did have to enforce it across, it would be almost impossible to get rules that would fit everywhere efficiently and effectively as well as possible if they had to apply to every possible state. I mean, here's what's funny, okay? This is something not a lot of kids understand. That is one of the primary reasons why the USSR, the Soviet Union, had so many problems in managing its wealth and managing its resources and its people, and ran into difficulties all over the place logistically and in terms of it being a feasible place to run such a massive, massive empire, because they tried to do that. They tried to make it so that there would be a rule as to how many boots would have to be produced in an area that needs boots, okay, so like Siberia, and then they would send the same amount of boots to an area where they don't need the boots. And they would do these sorts of things that are irrational, but it's what happens when you try to have a universal rule that fits everyone, and you're talking about a massive area, not just one small country. It's not like the country of Belgium. You're talking about a massive area that covers a lot of the world. Same with America. And so the concept for America, that's a logical one, is that these states all banded together, and that we're going to have these states determine amongst themselves. We're not just going to tell everyone how to do these things. So that is actually a core fundamental idea of being American, by the way. The concept of America as a country is that the states decide. And that is what Donald Trump repeatedly stressed through all these different periods as his primary policy, that he wants to exist. Yet it was presented that he was against gay marriage. So, okay, here's what's great. There was an interview he did on Pat Robertson's TV network. And if you don't know who Pat Robertson is, he's one of those like Christian evangelical preachers who has said lots of things which, by the way, are homophobic and are like racist and all sorts of horrible things, because he's one of those people who believes the Bible on a fundamental level. So he thinks that gay people sin, and he thinks that if people die in a certain part of the world, that is because God brought some sort of a pestilence or a plague upon them, or caused a natural disaster to kill them because they've betrayed some kind of Christian principles and they are gay, or they allow gays, or whatever it might be. In this, he really believes that shit. So because that guy has the ear of a lot of evangelical Christians, as part of Trump's attempt to become president, he was going to these states, he was going to these areas, and he was having airtime on these sorts of things. So when he was on that network, he was being interviewed, and he was asked directly by the interviewer on the topic that evangelical viewers of the show wanted to be able to trust Donald Trump on the issue of traditional marriage. That's what they were said. The context being, the reason why they wanted to know what he had to say about it so they could trust him on it, is the context was Trump had been described as one of the best pro-gay presidential candidates that America had. So in the Republican Party, I think it might have been. So in this scenario, people who maybe are against gay marriage, maybe don't like that context, etc., and want to uphold traditional values and all that sort of shit, wanted to know, are you pro-gay? Does that mean you're in favor of gay marriage and all this? So what Donald Trump said in this exact scenario was, again, he thinks it should be up to the states to determine for themselves. He reiterated that he was in favor of states being able to decide many issues, not just that one alone, but many issues. And he did not say that he's disgusted by gays, or it's wrong to be gay, or it's wrong to be gay married, or that he doesn't want them to be allowed to be married, or anything like that. And yet he was treated as if he said that. Now, the craziest part about that is that if he really did believe these things and he was a homophobe, this would be the perfect place to exhibit some of that. Because actually, he sort of soft-sold those people on what they wanted to hear. Sure, he's kind of like, he's made them feel a little bit more comfortable that he's not totally pro-gay, because he hasn't said, like, I'm in favour of gay marriage and I want it to exist. But he hasn't said to them, oh, I think gay marriage is wrong. Oh, I'm with you guys, actually. We should get it banned everywhere, and it shouldn't, no one should be allowed to do it. He said, let's let the states decide. And he's gone to that American ideal of like, well, you're not against the states deciding, are you? Which not many of them are going to be able to say anything about, right? So he's actually done a fantastic job of ideologically giving them a compromise, which actually doesn't give them what they think they're getting, but means that they can't really go anymore. There's an impasse as to where they can go and criticize him in that sense. And yet on this sort of a network, he would actually be more successful with those specific people, if that's who he really cared about getting the vote of, by telling them, you know what, I believe in the Bible myself, so I actually think gay marriage is wrong, and it's allowed right now, but I'm going to do everything I can to stop it, because I think it is wrong, and I hope one day it'll be stopped. He didn't say any of these things, and he was actually in a context where that would be the case. He wasn't on CNN doing an interview nationwide. He was in this very specific evangelical Christian context, where we already have a sense of what some of their ideas are, and the context was actually that he's pro-gay. Which, by the way, he also did not deny on that interview, despite the fact that that's what they were worried about, because they wanted to trust him. So let's go on. Donald Trump was once asked directly if he was a homophobe. He said in response that he loves people. Now, that's a fantastic answer, because he hasn't divided people up into gay and straight or homophobic, homosexual and heterosexual, whatever. He just said he loves people. That's a great way to start out your statement so that there can be no misunderstanding, right? What's crazy about this is people who are homophobic aren't afraid to make it known. Now, sure, Donald Trump in this phase is on the campaign trail. So you might say cynically, but he doesn't want gay people to openly know that he's homophobe, so he doesn't want to scare them away from voting for him. Where are all the past instances then of him saying, I'm not a homophobe, because a lot of people wouldn't describe themselves that way necessarily, but I don't like gay marriage, I think it's wrong. You can't go and find him saying these sorts of things. He might say that, he might suggest his own family might not do it, and that he believes in the Bible, etc. He doesn't say these things, even before he was on the campaign trail. Homophobes are not afraid to make it known. That's how we know they're homophobes. If they just kept it secretly inside their mind, there wouldn't really be a lot of issue with it, would they? But we have to look at how they act and how they speak. And then these sorts of people who are homophobes and who are dangerous homophobes of the kind that Donald Trump was presented to be, they are only too happy to let you know their ignorant opinions. That's the stupid part about the way this was presented. So before he was on the campaign trail, there was a scenario where in 2011 with the New York Times, he was interviewed. And he was asked on the topic of same-sex marriage about his traditionalist attitudes. And he gave this analogy. He said, it's like in golf. A lot of people, I don't want this to sound trivial, but a lot of people are switching to these really long putters. Very unattractive. It's weird. You see these great players with these really long putters because they can't sink 3-footers anymore. And I hate it. I am a traditionalist. I have so many fabulous friends who happen to be gay, but I am a traditionalist. Now, what's interesting about this is that the fact that the person takes this putter analogy, and in the article I read, takes this to be such a heinous analogy, says more about the person and how they're choosing to interpret it than what Donald Trump said. So what the person who was reading this article and reported on it and followed the Chinese game of Chinese whispers said was, here we go, it's easy to list off Trump's most memorable displays of homophobia. For example, in the 2011 New York Times, he compared his stance on same-sex marriage to his traditionalist attitudes about golf putter size. The bizarre analogy implied that gay men and lesbians were weird. Now, here's what's interesting about that. He said, in the context of the analogy about the golf clubs, that it's weird. Because what he finds weird is that these people who are great players were using these long putters. Now, he didn't say that homosexuality and gay marriage and same-sex marriage is weird. He actually never said that. That's to immediately take it out of context. Secondly, the implication that to say those things are weird is hateful and is homophobia is not anything to do with hatred, homophobia. It's actually an attack on the concept of language itself. Because here's the thing about that particular term. By the dictionary definition of the word weird, homosexuals and lesbians, I mean, it's the same thing essentially, but gay people are literally weird. Like, you go and look up the dictionary definition of weird, okay? And When you go and look into where it says antonyms, it says normal. Now, do you know what an antonym is? An antonym is a word that is opposite in meaning to another word. So essentially, weird, the word weird, the opposite word to the word weird, according to the dictionary, is the word normal. Now, what does the word normal mean in the dictionary? Normal is an adjective that means conforming to a standard, usual, typical, or to be expected. Now, it is quite clear by the statistics that the standard sexual type is heterosexual. And the usual, as a result, sexual type, the one that you find most often, the typical one, is heterosexual. And therefore, if you were to meet a random person, you should expect with a high degree of chance that they will be heterosexual. If they aren't, then that would be unconventional. It would be weird in this sense. It would not be normal. It would be unusual. It would be abnormal. These are all words which are synonyms for the word weird. So anyone who tells you in this sense that you are not allowed to say it is weird is actually attacking the fabric of language and what those words mean, not Donald Trump and the way he used it. They want words to mean one thing only, and they want to say something and have it in your brain that since someone can be gay, and it is clearly fine for them to be gay and they should be allowed to be, that even though it is statistically unlikely that a random person you don't know yet is in fact gay, you should act as though it's equally likely and therefore not ever dare to even assume something or suggest that since they are different, that they are in fact different. In fact, even to say they're different is wrong, because maybe that should be the normal. And you get into this area where it's all about this person's politics, not about the way the words are used. And it's not even about the intention of what people said. It's them berating other people over the use of language. Now, one of the reasons why this is really interesting is because I've seen this war happen on the word normal. And this is a tyranny of words, because ultimately this isn't a throwaway thing like, we'll just give them that word and we'll change to a different word. No, because what happens is words themselves affect how we think inside our minds. And then what ideas after thinking, because if you don't have certain words, you can't necessarily have certain ideas. And then after you've had certain ideas, how you can express those ideas to other people to help them think, to form a collective of how we're thinking and ideas and how they interact. And this tyranny of words is not about saying, I would like a new definition of this. It's about saying there is only one definition. It's not the established definition that used to be there. In fact, it's a weird definition. And from now on, anyone who doesn't do this is, and then they insert the worst thing you can call a person, a homophobe, a racist, a sexist. So this has nothing to do with Donald Trump. This is about this person trying to inflict his politics upon you and interpret something which, you know what, in that analogy there, I've read that analogy about 10 times. I still don't really understand what Donald Trump's point is. As far as I can tell is, his main point, the only thing that you can really take away from it without asking him a follow-up is that he personally is traditionalist, prefers to use a short putter and doesn't really understand why some people use long putters. So if you really wanted to go quite far trying to interpret what he means about gay people there, it would be that he personally doesn't think gay marriage is necessarily the right thing, and that he doesn't really understand why other people want to do it. That might be about it, which is very different from saying he hates them, doesn't want it to exist, it's disgusting. Doesn't say any of that stuff there. So there was another case where Michael Sam, who was the first openly gay NFL draftee, kissed his boyfriend in celebration. So here's what they say about this, okay? In 2014, as Gawker reminded its readers on Tuesday, Trump reacted badly when Michael Sam made NFL history as the first openly gay NFL draftee. He had some particularly choice thoughts about the celebratory kiss Sam shared with then-boyfriend Vitor Camisano, telling Fox and Friends that the football player was really going at it. Now, here's the interesting thing. This is why these articles exist and are media biased and are skewed, because even though I will pick them apart separately, they also never include the other information which goes against their interpretation and is key context, which shows that what they're saying almost cannot be a reasonable interpretation. So as usual, I go back to the original source and I looked up the interview with Fox and Friends and I listened to the interview. And this is what Donald Trump says. He actually says, before he gets to the really going at it part, that he doesn't know if the kiss was inappropriate. He knows that some people are bothered by it, and he thinks that political correctness has really gone too far when these people can't express their opinions. He even says he doesn't know if the kiss was inappropriate. He thinks it's great that that guy was chosen, hopes he does well. And then he says, of the kiss, that he thought the guy was really going at it. Now, what's interesting is, right after he says that, he draws a comparison with Tim Tebow. Now, in this interview, if you watch the interview alone, you won't know what the context of Tim Tebow is. But since Tim Tebow was doing a lot of stuff like openly praying at games and had his own opinions about Christian matters, a lot of people who aren't Christians and who have secular values thought that that was outrageous and were complaining about that. So what he did is he literally uses this as a double standard of the fact that people were mad at Tebow in that way, but people who are Christian and have certain values in this way, that not necessarily what he shares and he does not say, weren't allowed themselves because of political correctness to express that and say, I don't like that, or I don't want that to be and yet other people can say the same thing about Tim Tebow when it comes to his religion and how he chooses to do that. That's what the whole point of what Donald Trump said was. Now, this was written up in later Chinese Whispers type articles listing all the homophobic things Donald Trump had done as Donald Trump says in his comment, America is going to hell. Listen, that's what they say. America is going to hell because the NFL defended openly gay player Michael Sam. Now, in this interview, the part where Donald Trump explicitly says America is going to hell was about the political correctness part where people can't feel as though they can speak their mind. It was not in the part connected to the fact that he did the gay kiss and that he was really going at it. But they've took all of that context out and they've taken a part from a sentence miles before and a part later and they've connected them and they've told you that the reason he thought America was going to hell is because this person had done this openly gay kiss that was then defended by the NFL. That was absolutely not what he said in any way. And they have removed vital context to purposely ignore his intention and to paint a false narrative. Now, there was also a thing where Donald Trump had said about how he wanted to support the First Amendment and how important he thought this was on a political level. So people took that and put that in all these homophobic articles, saying that he's homophobic, and said that since First Amendment rights would protect people who they say are homophobes from expressing homophobic opinions, as in they couldn't just be punished and put straight in jail, that this meant that Donald Trump was basically in favor of those homophobic people saying homophobic things, and the implication was maybe even agreed with them. Now, that says it all, because it is tyranny to suggest that just because someone's homophobic, they can't say their opinion. Not saying they can't do something at their job to hurt a gay person or ruin their job or openly slur them in some way, but the idea that they can't even make an opinion like, I think gay marriage is wrong, that is tyranny and that is anti-American, to think that shouldn't be allowed. And Donald Trump is simply saying that he is in favor of the freedom of speech, essentially. The notion that if you're in favor of freedom of speech, you then implicitly agree with everything said with that speech, neither follows nor is appropriate to suggest, especially if the person himself does not make that implication himself, which Donald Trump did not. In 1999, Donald Trump was asked regarding equal treatment for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people, whether he thought equal treatment was something that actually is. Did he say no? Did he say I'm against that? Did he say I will fight and I will make policies to not do that? Like someone who was against those things would do. No. Donald Trump said in 1999, long before he knew he would be running for president, remember it's literally 17 years later that he's become president, he said, it's something I haven't given a lot of thought to. Now that was cited again on pages that may mean that he's a homo. This is the best evidence these people are finding and putting forwards 16, 17 years later that proves that he's gay. That proves that he's a homophobe. Obviously, he does it in any way. In an interview with the Brody file, you ready? This is a comment here. Trump was asked about his support of civil unions. This was an interview in 2011, again, long before he knew he'd be president. Trump responded, well, civil unions, look, first of all, I live in New York. I know many, many gay people, tremendous people. And to be honest with you, as far as civil unions are concerned, I haven't totally formed my opinion, but there can be no discrimination against gays. I'm against gay marriage. I took a lot of heat for that. Now, what's interesting about this one is this is actually one of the only ones that does seem to leave some room that someone could at least on a mild level be like Trump is against gay marriage. Because he does say, I'm against gay marriage. But then at the same time, he also says there can be no discrimination against gays. So he doesn't believe in discriminating against them. So actually, bearing in mind, this is years before he became president and would have to take a part in policy, that would be very interesting to get a follow-up on, right? Rather than just assume that you know one or the other. Because if something he says before is directly contradicted by something afterwards, it's not directly, you could have both opinions. Like one could be publicly there's no discrimination, and then one could be on a personal, private level, I'm against gay marriage. Those are two totally different things. But it is very interesting, the idea that if he was against it so much, he would speak in this way. Now, this is probably one of the closest to a sketchy quote I can find. And even then, yeah, you have to do a fair amount of digging and you have to really kind of figure out a way that you're going to interpret it to get this to be some sort of homophobic statement. Now, since Rosie O'Donnell famously came out as a lesbian and is gay, Since he has insulted her many times as a person and for her looks, somehow that has led to, again, him being labelled homophobic. So there was an example also where Ariana Huffington, he said, Ariana Huffington is unattractive both inside and out. This is a tweet. I fully understand why her former husband left her for a man. He made a good decision. Now, here's what's funny about that. This is one of the only other ones I would say is a bit sketchy because since it's a tweet, by the way, you can't put a lot of information there, but you could read that part of like, I understand why her former husband left her for a man. He made a good decision as meaning like, wow, she's so unattractive that like, even if he wasn't gay, he should just go gay and go just get away from her because she's such a horrible woman. So this was a little bit sketchy, but first of all, it's a slam. It's purposely, the intention here is not to insult the husband. It's to insult Ariana Huffington. So he's trying to find something absurd to do that, which is like, he even left you for a man. That's how ugly you are as a person, inside and outside, as a person and how you appear. Then you could also very well just say that if you look at the way this is here, we don't know where the emphasis was. It was a tweet. It wasn't even a spoken comment. So for all we know, the emphasis was the fact that her husband left her. I mean, factually, her husband did leave her for a man. Is he not supposed to mention that? If he mentions that, does that automatically carry the implication that leaving her for a man means that he was choosing between her and a man and that he chose the man because even a man's more... No, because that's not necessarily what her husband necessarily did, and that's certainly not what the statement would mean. So you could absolutely also say that this is actually coincidental that the person he leaves for happens to be a man, because that is also just the fact. There is no implication in there, and since we didn't hear him speak the sentence, we can't know where he placed the emphasis in it, what his tone was as he portrayed it. So here's another great one. So a lot of people don't know this, but the whole states' right bit. So when he actually made that comment also about transgender bathrooms, that he thought that should be a states' right issue, he himself was criticized by people from the Ted Cruz camp over the notion that he thought it should be a states' right basis, and they wanted to be like, oh, and he's going to allow men who want to dress like women to go into a bathroom where my daughter is. That's what it really was addressed as. So what's funny is Republicans themselves portrayed him as a pro-transgender person who was like way beyond the pale and all sort of thing. Now, Caitlyn Jenner is obviously someone who is a famous transgender individual. And so he had a comment he made on her a while ago that people often bring up, again, to show that he's a transphobe. And it said on Caitlyn Jenner, I knew him a little bit when Bruce was a great athlete. He was one of the best looking people you'll ever see. Now, here's the commentary that the person who wrote this on a website wrote. Ugh, Trump manages to be gross on so many levels with just one quote. First, he misnames and misgenders Caitlyn Jenner. No matter how you feel about her, using the old male name and pronouns is just rude. But then he pulls a familiar old Trump trick, judging women by appearance before anything else. Nice try, Trump. You have once again wrongly assumed that any woman on earth gives a fuck whether you find her attractive. Now, first of all, what is he saying in the context of that statement? I knew him a little bit when Bruce was a great athlete. He was one of the best looking people you'll ever see. Now, first of all, he's talking about when he knew Bruce Jenner. He doesn't know Caitlyn Jenner now, but he knew Bruce Jenner. So when he's talking about his memories of knowing someone who at the time was a man and had the pronoun him and his and at the time was called Bruce Jenner. So when he's talking about his own memories, he's supposed to take what has happened now and retcon the past. So what? Think about how logical this is. He's supposed to say, I used to know Caitlyn Jenner when she was a man. Oh, fuck, wait, I can't say that because technically she was always a woman. And I guess I didn't know her in that case. So, yeah, she was called Bruce Jenner at the time, but I'm going to have to call her Caitlyn Jenner because she's called Caitlyn Jenner now after the fact. And I guess that's it. No, that would be absolutely unreasonable. If you went to somewhere that had the name changed from it. So I think, for example, didn't the country Burma get its name changed to Myanmar? Now, if you went there while it was called Burma, it would be very reasonable when talking about it years later to say, I went to Burma back in insert year. Not to say I went to Myanmar and then say the year and someone go, isn't that anachronistic because isn't it be called Myanmar now? You see, that is, again, tyranny of language, where they're trying to change even what happened in the past using what's happening now. That's absolutely ridiculous. Also, notice the guy said there, he pulls a familiar old Trump trick, judging women by appearance before anything else. Let's look at his statement again. I knew him a little bit when Bruce was a great athlete. So before he's even gotten to the appearance, which is the second sentence, he was one of the best looking people you ever see. He actually judged him on the fact he was a great athlete. He judged him first on accomplishment. The person interpreting this sentence doesn't even interpret it correctly. In fact, factually is wrong in how they interpret it. The first thing he acknowledged was the fact that he was a great athlete. Then he talked about his looks. And at no point in time did he ever suggest that Bruce Jenner existed, as a man at the time, to look good to him. That was never an implication or interpretation any sane, reasonable person would probably take from that statement. I would propose, son. So one of the issues with this is that we're taking some of his opinions that aren't even when he was trying to become president, aren't even when he was trying to become a public servant. These are opinions expressed as a private citizen, his opinions and thoughts and speech, and they're judged as if he's a public servant now, as if he'd said them now. Now, people who portray that as though, well, that's inseparable, isn't it? What you say privately is what you do publicly. That's what's funny. They've just given away the game there. So what a lot of these people will do who are essentially ideologues and who actually are tyrannical and fascist in the way they think is because they themselves can only outwardly say and do, at least in how they present themselves. They're obviously a lot of them liars. What they really think and have to enact that on the world and say it no matter what, even if it's very inappropriate to fuck with someone's feelings, because they think that you have to do that. They can't imagine anyone else could be any other way. They can't imagine a world in which you could think something and think, wouldn't be appropriate to say that actually. Actually in this company here, I should compromise and not do that. And actually, I wouldn't enact something that even though I think this certain way. They can't imagine that world. So what's funny is they show themselves to be intellectually rigid, incapable of being malleable, incapable of compromising, negotiating, living with people, socializing, cooperating. All the things that you would want from people who are public servants. Now, it was obviously presented that Donald Trump is a sexist. So the best example of this was the whole locker room talk thing, where he said about how if you're a famous person, you can just grab them by the pussy and all that. Now, this, to me, showed the hypocrisy of so many people in America, particularly in the media. Because first of all, we had people acting like it's fine to judge what someone says privately in a private conversation intended only for the ears of the other person in the conversation, not knowing you're in front of a group. You can judge that when it's then leaked in a public context as though they'd said it publicly and in front of all of us and with that intention. Now, that is absolutely disgusting as a premise. I don't accept that premise. And it is entirely disgusting if you think about it. Because I don't know about you, but the way I talk to my friend when we're on the sofa together here is very different than the way I would talk to my friend on the sofa here if my mom was sat in the seat across from me. It'd be very different from the way I'd talk to my friend on the sofa, my mom sat on the other seat, and then if my boss walked in. And then you know what? It'd be very different if my friend was on the sofa, my mom was on the other seat, my boss walked in, and then my little sister came in as well. If you think that you would speak the same way to all of them, and that the speech that you say to one of them should be leaked to the others and judged publicly as to what your character is, then I think you live an incredibly dishonest life. And I don't believe there are people out there who can maintain some sort of universal way of speaking that communicates their feelings and somehow takes into account, it can ignore the context of all relationships and the circumstances and then thinks that that's reasonable. I don't know the person. I think they just get away with claiming that's the case because they never have to have their private conversations judged publicly like this. So the idea that you can even get to hear that is disgusting. Whoever leaked that, is, to me, that's borderline criminal. That should not be allowed. Now, there's also the case that so many people pretend that they've never spoken anything like that. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm saying that they have said, I'd grab by the pussy. It's the notion that they've said anything along those lines which would be considered insensitive, inappropriate, sexist, if it got out to other people. Now, almost everyone I know in my life, so I can only talk about me in the private conversations I've had with everyone. I have talked to people from all stratas of esports and other aspects of real life, and I've been to many different cities around the world, been something like 40 to 50 different countries. From talking to people in private, like taxi cab drivers, friends, people at bars when you're having a drink with them afterwards, almost everyone in the world talks like this. In fact, when you're in a setting like that, where it's a relaxed setting and it's private, sometimes, and this is a concept again that people ignored, sometimes you even purposely talk in a bawdy manner to give across the perspective to the person that you're fun-loving, that you're out there, you're not afraid to say what you want to think. You might even do it for humor's sake. You might do it because you are insecure and you want to appear like you're very good with women or whatever. The idea that people don't do this, and people even watching this video will claim, that's disgusting, I'd never do that. Doesn't matter what you say now publicly. publicly. The fact of the matter is, my own experiences and the experiences of a number of people have shown that this is going on all over the place. It's certainly not just this one lunatic who spoke that way and that shows he's some sort of a sexist. The idea that if he can speak that way and think that way privately and doesn't act on it in public and gives a very good and gives off a totally different perspective in public surely shows that he's a reflective person, that he understands this isn't appropriate and that he isn't behaving in that way. No, it's always presented that Donald Trump's this guy who just shoots off at the mouth and says whatever he wants. See, the narratives don't even fit up. It doesn't even make sense. When people like LeBron James claim that no one in locker rooms ever says anything about women like that, if you know anything about certain cultures and the way that people speak, for example, sports cultures and the way people speak in locker rooms, this is ludicrous. I have been in locker rooms, I've been in sports environments where people talked way wilder than what Donald Trump said. And no, I don't think it's some sort of criminal thing, because at the end of the day, the woman that they're talking about isn't in the fucking locker room there, and that does not follow on that they are then going to mistreat her or whatever. It's also, as a broader topic, people who are just in denial of the human species and the way that we act, and the notion that we literally have to always behave in some Victorian, polite manner, and that even if you want to have sex with someone, you have to say to them, may I please begin the engagement of the sexual intercourse part of our relationship? That wouldn't even work. What's funny is, there's scenarios in which if you went to kiss a girl and she actually was into it, she would kiss you back. But if you were to say to her, things seem to be going really well right now, I'd like to kiss you, just the implication of you saying that publicly and the way that she would have to then think about, whoa, he's actually saying this to me and I have to think about it and I have to answer, might actually make her go, no, this is too weird. They make it awkward and uncomfortable. People who deny that reality, again, I actually almost can't believe that they really do believe these things. I think that's just ideology gone so far that they can deny their own being and deny even the way they think and deny the way that things are in life. Now, I can certainly see that people who are incredibly socially awkward, like some of these social justice warriors, actually do think that way. And because they don't have any clue how to approach a woman or talk to a woman or that, they want to paint everyone else, all the cool guys, those assholes that women like. That's how they want to portray this narrative. They're like, that's why they get the women, because they just force themselves on them, don't they? That's the sort of worldview they're giving. So again, it tells more about their worldview than any sort of normal person who just knows some of the social cues and just does things without just explicitly thinking they have to fucking narrate their life out loud so that somehow someone can not do what they don't want to do. As though the person couldn't just not kiss you if they don't want to kiss you. It's a ridiculous scenario that we're being presented with here. It's also the case that people take it, in terms of the sexism angle, that every time he insults a woman, that's him insulting all women and hating all women. Now, there is a massive difference, by the way, between insulting someone and doing something unethical or expressing something unethical. There are people who I wouldn't express something unethical about, but I will absolutely insult because I don't like them. I don't like the way they've behaved. I don't like things they've said to me. So I will insult them, say something rude, say something nasty about them to hurt their feelings, to show them I do not like them or respect them, and to make them for a moment be publicly humiliated. That does not mean that I hate all people of their species, gender, or sexual orientation. That is a ridiculous leap to make, and you have all your work to show that I would in that scenario. So in this scenario, I think a reasonable interpretation of what Trump said to these women would be he intended to insult those specific women and on those specific grounds. Not all women, not all genders, not all sexual orientations. So the sickest part about all of this is Donald Trump is treated as someone who's this big mouth, who's a loudmouth, who speaks without thinking and isn't considerate of his speech. And yet at the same time, the best evidence they have that he is all these horrible things is to take things he says and to purposely omit part of them without mentioning that they're omitting part of it, remove any context of where he said it and how he said it and who he said it to, and then take it and read as deeply as you can into the vaguest parts of it and interpret words differently than he would choose to define them in his own dictionary in order to get them to be what these people want to hear. So if he's such a loudmouth and he makes such brazen statements, and he said so much over the years, why do they need to look for codes, secret messages, hidden on any level from someone they say has directly insulted women and gold star families, etc.? They are painting a picture in which they take away context. They omit context. Now, context is important to understand. Who did he say it to? How did he say it? And what did they say before that spurred him to say it? What did he say afterwards that might have clarified it as a follow-up? They are removing all of that because they don't want you to take an interpretation that's different than theirs. Now, someone who's actually in the media, someone who actually cares about journalism and wants this person's real opinion to get out there would be adding context, like I've done in this video, not removing context. That's very suspicious behavior right there. They are not trying to help you understand what he was attempting to communicate. They are purposely obfuscating what he was attempting to communicate, interpreting it for you in order to give you a different perspective than what you otherwise might have taken. I mean, think about this for a second about Donald Trump. Here is someone who has been a billionaire businessman for decades and decades and decades as a public figure, giving hundreds and thousands of interviews and making public statements, and he hasn't had a Twitter account for the last few years. All of this without any plan to run for president. So he wasn't in the back of his mind thinking, better be careful what I say, better use some code words in case I ever want to become president. Wasn't doing that at all. And yet, oh, by the way, even said publicly many, many times that he would not run for office and try to become president. He didn't want to do the job. And yet, after all those years, decades, 30, 40 years of interviews and chances and all these things, he said the best they could come up with of evidence in the information age where everything's on the internet, the best they could come up with is these things that they've had to purposely obfuscate, lie about, misinterpret, change the definition of words, remove aspects that he said before, purposely ignore the context of who he's talking to. They've had to do all that to get anything that they consider evidence. And look how tenuous and shaky it is when someone comes along, listens to the original thing, looks at the interpretation is and picks it apart completely. These are the worst statements the guy made in 50, 60 years, is it? And by the way, some of the most compelling ones from a leaked private conversation, not even something he said privately in any possible context. Now, what disgusts me most about this portrayal and this bias, apart from how unethical it is and how it goes against everything that journalism is supposed to stand for, is that it actually belittles the concept of dangerous sexism that exists, of real homophobia, of transphobia that might actually one day lead to people damaging or ruining the lives of transgender people. Because if he's a horrible homophobe, sexist, racist, transphobe, then what gap is there to the people who actually are like that, who are doing these things, who are trying to enact policies like that, who are saying things on a daily basis that is horrific and trying to do horrible things? Where's the gap? There's no nuance, right? They're just all like that. And so if he's the worst, then imagine an alien come to Earth. Oh, that's the worst. Wow, you live in a fucking utopia if that's the worst, mate. You seem like a very progressive, liberal country then, in that case. Your secular values have succeeded. No, but this is the worst ever. He's the new Hitler. Why not focus on real instances of that? Oh, right, that's right, because you were waiting to try and push your own political narrative and literally brainwash and propagandize your own colleagues and peer group just to believe something that you've decided to believe yourself, that if you looked at the context, was never there to begin with.